Hey guys, I'm a 31-year-old male, and my father, he abandoned me when I was a kid. He spent his life looking after my half-siblings, giving them everything, and I didn't even see him again or hardly talk to him except for that random card in the mail for Christmas or my birthday. He wouldn't even call me on the phone. Well, you know what? His tune changed a little bit when it came to my grandmother's funeral, and he found out just how much inheritance she left me. And he wasn't very happy, so he gives me a phone call and he says this. I'm 31 and male. I'm so insanely angry at my father right now that I don't even know what to do about it. Our problems go back when I was just 6. I was extremely close to my mother as a child, and she was the one who stayed home, so my parents would not have to worry about fitting their work schedules around me after school. This meant that she was the parent I spent most of my time with, and that being said, I wasn't just a mama's boy. I had a pretty decent relationship with my own father as well, and yeah, he wasn't the most affectionate person I'd ever known, but he was a lot of fun. And we went to places like the zoo as a family on the weekends. He never neglected me, and I remember once my mother telling me that I shared his smile and his sense of humor. Well, these days, the fact that anybody would ever be compared to him makes me sick to my stomach because my relationship with my father essentially ended at the same time I lost my mom. I was in the 1st grade at the time. On our drive back from school, I was teaching her a song we'd learned in our music class that day. I'm always going to wonder if my distracting her played a role in what happened, and I just hate that she's not around to give me an answer. In any case, at the same time we were driving, there was a junkie driving the other way. I've read police reports from the day once I got older, and it seems like he had not actually been using anything. But he was tying off his arm so that he could use it while driving, and he got distracted and veered into our lane, and I don't know if it was just because it happened so quickly, or if our singing was keeping my mom from paying as much attention as she would have, but all I know is that she did not steer out of the way in time, and the irony is that I can't even remember the name of the song. It was some stupid, made-up word, which is why I thought it was so fun. I've never made the mistake of taking pleasure in nonsense things like that again. Well, I lost my entire family in that accident, and my mother was gone forever. I lost that part of me that loved to laugh, and the only thing I remember her ever saying she loved about me. And my dad, well, he just stopped being my dad. I had to spend quite a bit of time in the hospital. Both legs were shattered with particularly expensive damage to my right femur. My dad sought financial assistance where he could, and we were able to get a lot of surgeries done at a non-profit children's hospital. Well, obviously that was helpful, but it's still impossible to suffer that kind of injury without racking up expenses. I was constantly on medication for several months of the initial recovery, and I had to be on bed rest after each surgery, which numbered to the point that I would be in and out of the hospital for the coming years. When I was recovering at home, I often needed help since I was told to mobilize in a wheelchair instead of crutches. Guys, the point is, there was a lot going on with me, and I have no problem understanding why my father could not manage it alone. My maternal grandma had done well for herself, and she also received a fair sum when my mom's dad passed away. She was a sensible person to ask for help with the bills. And since she was retired, she was not the worst person to ask for help during the times I needed a caretaker. So, she and my dad decided that it made more sense for me to live with her for a while. He would still visit me at night after work, but his energy wasn't like the man I knew. He'd bring me books or games for my Game Boy that I never wound up playing. Even though he was struggling with the initial bills he paid before my grandma helped, his friends and coworkers were donating things for him to bring me. Well, he obviously tried his hardest to make sure my time on bed rest was never boring at the beginning, but the time I actually got to spend with the man himself was just different. It's not just that he wasn't fun, but he was also distant. It's like he was just there to give me things. He didn't feel like a man visiting his son. Even as a child, you can tell the differences. Over time, he came less and less, and I mean, come on, that's fine. I would fill the void by reading the books that he brought me or doing homework my grandma picked up from school. She also brought me a get well soon card, and the other kids in my class had signed it. None of my school friends visited after the accident, so the card did not feel genuine, but at least they tried. I mean, my own dad felt like he wasn't even putting in the energy to pretend that he cared anymore. By the time that I was 7, I almost never saw the man again. I know my grandma was not happy about it. She never said anything directly, but I would just hear her arguing with Dad on the phone when she thought my medicine had put me to sleep. It was through one of those people's calls that I learned that he was getting married. So the marriage, it was scheduled for the same week that I was having knee surgery to remove a foreign body that's gotten stuck between my kneecap during a pin removal. So I wasn't going to be invited. But I wasn't even mad about that. I was, left out. I was simply mad that I still wanted my mom back. And it felt like he'd already forgotten either of us once existed. I started growing up pretty fast after that. I don't know if I actually had the words for it back then, but over time I've grown to look back on that as the day I knew I had myself, my grandma. Nobody else. I didn't stop seeing my father entirely. He was busy with his new wife, especially once they had children. But once or twice a year, he would feel guilty and simply want to reconnect. Because of that, I occasionally got to meet his family, and they were very good people. And I can't say that they were ever unkind to me. I never really came to see my half-siblings as family, though, but I did come to see them as friends. One of them, even attended my high school during my last couple of years there, and I really enjoyed getting to know him. And when a complication caused by remaining deformities in my femur led to another surgery in junior year, my half-brother called to check on me more than my dad did, and still, a part of me hated all of them for getting all the time in the world to spend with the father that I'd lost. And when he got a new job and started filling his new house with expensive things for his other kids, I got downright angry that he was still letting my grandma take care of me financially. It made me especially angry when Grandma started working just so she could help pay my tuition, without drawing against my inheritance in case anything ever happened to her. In recent years, she came down with ALS. It's a horrible disease to watch someone go through. Thankfully, I've gotten a pretty decent career as a freelancer right out of school. It did not pay a ton, but COVID meant that I could work from home and still care for my grandmother when she needed it. As hard as it was balancing a new job with being a caretaker, there was something fulfilling, about having the chance to repay my debt to the woman who had taken care of me all throughout my surgeries. She was tough. Surviving that disease for 4 years is a very uncommon feat, and when she finally passed away a couple of weeks ago, I'll admit it was a relief not to watch her suffer anymore. My half-siblings help a lot with the funeral, and the youngest, Alexa, is a pretty gifted writer who helped form my memories of Grandma into a beautiful eulogy. Eddie, he helped me sort through a lot of paperwork and finances that I was having trouble organizing. I didn't see as much of Harriet, because she had final weeks and school, but she did come over to bring a couple of food items. But I didn't see anything of my father. That is, until 2 days ago at the funeral. When the service started, Alex and Eddie sat near the front with me. The row is typically reserved for family and close friends, but I felt okay with them being there since they've helped me out. My dad sat near the back, and his wife and Harriet weren't with him. At the service, Eddie and Alex shook my hand and suggested me like everyone else, and hugged me. I honestly hate that part of the funerals where the family has to let everyone give them condolences, but I didn't mind it coming from the people who had actually shown care to her. My dad was the last to come up, and I got the feeling that it was on purpose because he didn't even try to shake my hand. The first thing he did was ask about my inheritance, and a lot of people don't know this, but there's not usually a quote or reading of the will like there is in the movies. But as her only surviving relative, I knew what my grandmother left me. And even after her medical bills and cost of her service, it's not particularly a small amount. Well, apparently, Eddie had made a passing mention to my father after helping me with Grandma's finances, saying that at least she had left me enough to take a look after myself. I didn't ask how much my dad wanted. I didn't ask what it was for. I just pointed to the door and told him to get out. He tried to say something at that point, but I was seething with my grandma resting not 2 feet behind me. I reminded him that he'd never been there for us when we needed it, which is when he brought up the room. You see, when I was about 12 during a visit to his place, he showed me a guest bedroom that he set up in case I ever wanted to stay over. It had its own TV and a collection of movies I'd liked as a child. It had a PS3, a PlayStation, and it just made me so angry I'd left behind frivolous things like video games years ago. In all his supposed attempts to reconnect, he had not learned a single thing about me. I didn't see him the rest of the year, and he never even tried to bring the room up again. But I wasn't going to let him guilt-trip me with it now that he'd shown up many, many years after abandoning me just to ask for handouts. We'd decide not to make the burial part of the ceremony, and the committal was not until the following morning. I told him not to come. When he tried to protest, I began raising my voice until he left. Eddie showed up to the committal the next morning to support me, but he didn't mention my father or the inheritance, and I could tell that he looked uncomfortable, though. And while I did not ask, I'm wondering if maybe they really are having some sort of financial struggles that no one even told me about. Now, I'm not sure what to do. I have so much resentment towards this man, but should I have heard him out anyways? What if he's asking for the sake of the family? I don't want my resentment towards him to hurt the half-siblings who have been there for me. I'm just worried. I'm too overwhelmed to see things clearly. What would you guys do? Let me know in the comments down below. I will update you guys in a bit. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. So I read some of the comments, and it seems like a lot of them just feel like OP was straight up abandoned by the dad. And I have to agree, but maybe, just maybe, in these following updates we're going to learn some more about what exactly the father was thinking. Guys, today I'm coming at you with 4 complete updates, and if you're new to the channel, well, this is a regular thing, so go ahead and check back tomorrow for another daily story, and don't forget to subscribe. Here is your first update. Update number 1. I got some helpful advice from my last post, so I want to provide an update. I decided to speak with my half-siblings. I called Eddie and invited him to lunch, asking if he could bring Alex and Harriet along if they were willing. Well, he showed up alone. The short version is that they really are going through money issues, but the reason wasn't something I would have guessed. According to Eddie, Alex had actually been dealing with some major health problems for the past couple of years. Toward the end of the lockdown, she'd spend some time in the hospital, showing signs of renal failure. Luckily, they were able to diagnose the issue and treat her to the point that she was able to return home. The diagnosis is that she has lupus. Apparently, this is why she was not at the committal. She gets marks on her face from being in the sun, and she gets self-conscious about it. And that's also why she did not come to lunch. She knew. Eddie and I had agreed to meet at an outdoor cafe. Thinking back, I guess I had seen some signs. She seems stiff and fatigued at certain points during the week, but I also knew that she's been writing a lot recently. I got really bad computer elbow whenever I had a lot of essays to do in college, so I figured she was dealing with something similar, and I also noticed she gained a little bit of weight, which I thought was just for the best since she's always been on the unusually skinny side. As Eddie explained, lupus causes water retention. I didn't really know what to say, and even though I haven't been extremely close to that side of the family, I do consider them part of my life. It was strange to think that she'd been dealing with this for so long, and no one thought to tell me. Eddie said that they would have told me early on if things at the hospital got significantly worse, but they decided to hold off once she was stable enough to continue with her life, and they didn't want to burden me with it when I was already dealing with my grandmother's ALS. I told Eddie that the thought was certainly kind, but I actually would have preferred being kept inside of the loop. I would have been perfectly content to accommodate Alex if I would have known. I could have arranged for a canopy at the committal ceremony. If nothing else, we could have had picked a different place for lunch. There was a bit of an awkward silence after that, so I decided to just ask point blank if this had anything to do with her father asking for money. Eddie confirmed that it did. While Alex has been mostly stable, her kidney's been in gradual state of decline. She's on the donor list, but it could be years before she's up for transplant, and they're worried that they don't have that long. So our father came up with this brilliant idea to try to bribe someone to move her up, and I don't actually know if that's even legal. But I'm not going to use my grandma's money to find out. I had Eddie call our father and tell him I was willing to discuss financial things for other options. We arranged for me to come over this weekend so that I can meet with the other family. So a thank you to everyone who told me to reach out. It hasn't been easy losing that second important woman in my life, but she may have left me something I can use to help somebody else. I might not have known that without your help. Update number 2. Just when I was on the verge of something close to compassion, my dad found a new way to disappoint me. The saddest part is that it's not even all that new. He's definitely replaying the hits. I met with my dad and half-siblings as planned, and his wife Lisa was there too. It was the actual first time in a while that I'd seen all of them in one place. I'd done some research after my lunch with Eddie and learned that Alex doesn't have to wait on the transplant list if she can find a willing donor on her own. I thought it was odd that they would not have already looked into this themselves, but apparently they had. My dad's bribery idea was simply to avoid risking one person's health for another, if they could avoid it. I told him that I understood, but we weren't using my grandma's money for this unless we did it the proper way. Well, things from there got very, very chaotic, so try to bear with me. First, a car horn sounded outside. Harriet's phone was on the dining room table and it started to vibrate, and she checked it, and it said something about not paying attention to the time and then quickly ran upstairs. When she came down, she had a suitcase with her, and I stood up in surprise as soon as I saw the suitcase. I couldn't understand where she had been going in the middle of an important conversation like this. Well, Lisa explained that Harriet and 6 of her friends were traveling to Europe for the summer as a graduation present. Well, this was a bit confusing since Eddie had mentioned at lunch that, Harriet failed one of her classes and had to finish in the fall. But Lisa and our father said they'd already promised her the trip and just thought it would be wrong to go ahead and cancel it. I couldn't say anything for a moment. I was silent as I watched Harriet exit the door to meet her friends. As soon as she closed the door behind her, my hand slammed on the table. I could understand his kids not having insurance even in a nice house like this. That's more responsibility than I'd ever expect from him, but how are they paying a season-long vacation for 7 people when I'm here trying to save his youngest daughter's life? Eddie and Alex looked uncomfortable. Lisa even looked a bit intimidated. My dad, despite jumping a bit when I first raised my voice repeatedly, almost casually, that they'd promised her the trip. Well, I was furious. I thought maybe this man was coming from a good place. But he's never changed, and he's still letting others foot the bill for his sick child while he pampers the healthy ones? I know people grieve differently, and sometimes this includes denial, but that's supposed to be a phase. This man had made it his lifestyle, and I just wanted to get out of there, so I pressed on. Since they'd already told me that they explored the donor option before, I asked if they had started the compatibility testing, having learned before coming that those can take months. Lisa chimed in. Only one of us matched O-negative blood type, and he's done the testing. He's a match. So I turned to my father and asked when he could schedule the transplant, and that's when Eddie corrected me and said that he was the match Lisa was talking about, and that sent my pulse through the roof. To explain my anger, I needed to explain why I thought my dad was the match. The day my mom died, the cops managed to get a hold of my father. When he rushed over from the work, they were still prying me out of the wreckage. They'd already called my mom's death by the time he got there, and he completely lost his senses when he saw her bagged up. Well, something asked him to do a blood transfusion. I didn't understand all that until much later because, as a kid, I just heard him screaming, "Oh, I'm O-negative! I'm O-negative! I can do it! Use me!" There's a lot that goes into determining organ compatibility. But if my dad's O-negative blood type, wouldn't be an issue. If they thought Eddie was the only blood match, it means my dad lied to them. Well, I called him out, immediately in front of everyone. For a second, nobody said a word. Then shaking, Eddie got up from the table and he went around and punched our father twice across the face and walked silently out of the house. Then my dad, his face still marked, stood up and screamed at me for me to get out. I quietly told Alex to call me if, she needed anything and left. And when I got outside, Eddie's car was already gone and I'm almost beside myself with absolute rage. There has to be a way I can help this girl, but for the first time I feel absolute need to hold my dad accountable for the way that he's treated his family. I'll update you when I figure out how to do it. In the meantime, suggestions are very much appreciated. Update number 3. I'm not really much of what you would call a revenge person. It's just not me. But I have to be honest. The week since my last update has been incredible. Eddie and Alex both called me the days after I made my last post. Eddie spent most of the first day just driving around. He wasn't comfortable going home, so he spent the night in his car, and Alex had spent most of the day in her room listening to Lisa and our dad scream at each other. To solve both their problems, I invited them both to stay with me. Despite my grandma having money, she never cared for a big house. But it's big enough that Alex could stay in my grandma's room and Eddie could stay in the guest room. And it wasn't until the day after their first night here that Alex finally let herself break down over the way our father betrayed her. Not only had he told one of the most selfish lies possible, but Alex herself felt guilty that she and Eddie never told me about Harriet's trip. She swears that she wasn't doing it out of selfishness and that she just didn't want to cause more problems between me and my dad. I told her I don't care what her reasoning is, I'm not going to blame a teenage girl for having terrible parents, you know. Watching her cry was hard. Eddie was having trouble comforting her as much as he wanted because he kept shaking as his anger was overtaking his sympathy. I've never been good at comforting people at all. I can't really feel what other people are feeling, so watching them suffer just makes me feel awkward and helpless. But I knew this time, because that's exactly what she was feeling. Helpless. The same way I felt every time my grandma tried to comfort me through my leg pains, and all I wanted was for my mom or dad to be there to do it instead. I wasn't just looking at a girl who had been betrayed, I was looking at a girl who had just lost her dad. Well, that's when I realized exactly how my father needed to be put in his place. I didn't just want him to be held accountable, I wanted him to feel lost. I waited another couple of days before talking to Eddie and Alex about what I was thinking. I needed to give her a breather after the big breakdown because it wasn't going to be easy to tell them, especially her about my plan. But I needed her to, understand it thoroughly so that she would not be surprised by some of the things I planned to say. She was apprehensive at first, but we eventually got on the same page and called our father to just go ahead and schedule another meeting about the transplant. We went over the next day. We found him alone, and Lisa was already furious that he would lie about being able to save his own daughter. But after his lie drove their children out of the house, she apparently didn't make it a day before telling him she wanted to separate. He doesn't know where she's staying at any rate. I told our father that if he could spend my childhood giving the money I needed for medical bills to my half-siblings, then I could do the same. And I was going to give it to the one who hated him the most. The way it would work is that my dad would agree to do the compatibility test. If he were to be a match, Eddie would get to decide which one of them were going to get the transplant. Well, yeah. And if Dad did not agree to the testing or the transplant, Alex would not be getting one at all. He called me a monster and said it was horrible that I would put my own sister in that position, and I corrected him. No, that whatever position I put her in would ultimately be up to him. My dad, he looked absolutely terrified, and so did Alex. Even though I'd prepped her for this, I think that she was more scared to learn what our father would choose. Eddie just stared cold, knowing his turn was coming up. Well, our father had tears in his eyes and begging me not to do this, but none of us said anything, and finally he crumbled. His face in his hand said that he would be doing the testing. And that's when Eddie told him not to bother. We already decided that Eddie would do the transplant. You know, since he's already been fully tested, we could book a transplant facility within weeks. More importantly, Alex did not want any part of her dad anymore. Life savings or not, he could have had 4 wonderful kids and a loving wife. Now he would be left alone to spend his money on Harriet. We turned around and we left. Harriet's dad was screaming for us to not go as we walked out that door. Eddie kept his arm around Alex's shoulders so she would not be afraid to keep looking forward. The mood was heavy around the house that night, but I think we all felt a sense of relief. It was like the relief I felt when my grandmother passed, but this time it was for our own suffering that we would not have to attend anymore. The next day, we all felt a lot lighter. Guys, to be honest with you, I'm not really sure what the 3 of us are ultimately going to do. I honestly saw this as a temporary living arrangement, but we'll figure that out later. I think it would be good for Alex if they both stayed here until her surgery. As I said before, that should be at least a couple of weeks. If anything major happens before then, I'll do an update. But hopefully it'll be smooth sailing until then, with a bit of good news at the end. Update number 4. It took a little longer to update than I thought it would. I didn't want to update until Alex was discharged to come home, and that took a little longer than I knew when I made my last post, and I was also a little optimistic about how long it would take us to book the surgery. In any case, she's now home and doing fine. Eddie also made it throughout without any major complications, and that's great. They'll be recovering here with me for the time being. Meanwhile, I've taken up the couch while Lisa takes my room until they're both fully recovered, and if all goes well, Alex will be mobile and plenty of time to start college. She talked about living in the dorms, but I told her she doesn't have to move out unless it's truly her decision. I actually kind of like having my brother and sister here. I should update you about Lisa. Apparently, Eddie and Alex have already been in touch with her. They weren't sure if they would tell me because of how I reacted when Lisa told me about Harriet's vacation. A couple of days after our confrontation with Harriet's dad, I brought her up myself, and they told me that she's been staying at a hotel. Over the weeks leading up to the transplant, we've all been spending quite some time together, going out or even just bringing board games to Lisa's hotel, so that she would not be feeling that lonely. She feels horrible about the thing with Harriet, but she said she only went along with it because her soon-to-be ex-husband told her the money was absolutely no issue. She didn't know that I was the source until the day that we all spoke together. Well, even then, it turns out my willingness to go ahead and pay had been grossly misrepresented, and honestly, I believe her. Even if I didn't, I've seen nothing but a sincere woman over the past few weeks. It may not always sound like it, but I do believe people can change from their mistakes. If it ever sounded otherwise, it's simply because I never got to see much of that change from Harriet's dad. As for him, I guess none of this is technically sure what he's going to do. Lisa's filing for divorce, and she's willing to co-parent with Alex through college if she decides she wants to renew the relationship. But it hasn't been thoroughly discussed. Sometimes the sound of his screaming as we left it echoes in my mind. It was exactly what I wanted him to feel, but having felt it myself, I wonder if we did not go too far. Even if we did, we're happy with the family that we have now. And I'd say about a week before the transplant, while playing Scrabble with my siblings, I heard myself laugh for the first time in maybe 20 years. Perhaps I've been laughing since some time after they moved in, but I heard it this time. And since if she's always said my laugh reminded her of Harriet's dad, getting it back feels almost like having my own mom again. Harriet, meanwhile, is going through a bit of a rough patch. She called Lisa while we were in the waiting room during the transplant, and it turns out that she and her friends blew through their vacation fund a lot sooner than they were supposed to, and she even called up her father. Yeah, and she was asking for more money. But the hypocrites apparently are now mad that she treats him like a meal ticket. As if he didn't teach her that behavior himself, he told her that if he gave her the money to finish the vacation, he would not pay for her last semester so she could graduate. The man turned cold really quick. Well, I told Lisa I would fly Harriet back early if they would convince her father to let her graduate, but Lisa's worried that just means Harriet will wind up living with a man who's already spoiled her too much for her own good. So, we decided I'd instead fly her back only if she moved in with her mother once Lisa found more permanent arrangements. Harriet's staying in a hostel while she makes up her mind. I have a feeling she's going to wind up choosing to not graduate. And that's pretty much it. Our family might still be dysfunctional in some ways, but I'm grateful for us.